Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Happy Cynics. I'm Kevin Twain Lowry, Dr. K, and here with my co-host, the all-seeing eye dog, Isaac Dillman.
Howdy, howdy.
All right. Well, we're coming up to the election. This is the one that everybody's been talking about, and everything is at stake and this and that and the other.
Yeah, we're almost free.
Yeah, hopefully. The thing is that it just boggles my mind, Isaac, that the most, I would say it's pretty obvious that the most corrupt person we've ever had in the White House is being largely supported by the people who claim to be the best Christians in the country.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, it's shocking just how much of a close race it still is. So we're recording this the 22nd of October. It'll probably go out about 2 weeks from now, so just before the election.
Yeah.
But at this point in time, it's a close race. And the people who seem to be overwhelmingly voting for Trump, or say they're voting for Trump, are those who think that Trump was chosen by Jesus personally, handpicked by God. It's the evangelical Christians who are keeping him in this race.
Exactly. And, both of us grew up evangelical, and I cannot fathom people would not have voted for somebody like Trump 50 years ago.
No,
evangelicals. No, there absolutely was no way. Even some of those folks were reluctant to vote for Reagan because they weren't really sure just how honest of an individual he was, or whether he was really sincere in other words, this notion that they didn't care about it just is not true, that the average Christian didn't care what Reagan really thought personally. They only voted for him after they were convinced that he really did support their values. And that's much more than Trump, because everybody knows he was pro-choice before becoming a politician.
Yeah, well, and so Reagan's interesting because Reagan was the governor of California before becoming president, right?
Right.
As governor of California, he introduced no-fault divorce, which was like a huge problem for the evangelicals.
Right.
And I mean, I think Reagan was disingenuous in his, personal beliefs.
Well,
the same way Trump is. But then you can even go further back to Nixon. The evangelicals were largely in favor of Nixon until they learned that he's, breaking the law, and then they turned on him. They won't do that for Trump, though.
And the evangelicals overwhelmingly voted for Jimmy Carter because he came out in the campaign and said, "I'm a born-again Christian."
Right.
I remember this because that's the only time my parents voted Democrat.
Interesting.
And they this is how far evangelicalism has slid, or has fallen, in my opinion.
Has sold out.
Yeah. I mean, I hate to say that, but that's the way it feels. It feels like the entire core of the tradition has just been abandoned and taken over by a bunch of narcissists who just care about their own cultural values and don't even pay attention to Jesus himself and the things that he said. But yet they do all this in Jesus' name. And it really is sickening, in my opinion. If they want to support the guy, then support him on a personal basis and leave Jesus out of it. Because that's really what I want to focus on here. I don't know how anybody defends the view. I understand that there are people that want to say, okay, well, in the Old Testament, God used Nebuchadnezzar and other people to achieve his purposes. Okay. Yeah, I guess if you're a 5-point Calvinist and believe that everything is God's will or whatever, then God sometimes uses evil people to do. I mean, is somebody really going to go down that rabbit hole that the Holocaust and all that stuff was all part of God's will and God used Hitler to accomplish his purposes? And I mean, the thing is that you might be able to make that kind of an argument that that was an Old Testament thing, but there's nothing like that in the New Testament.
Well, I think part of it is that evangelicals tend to have a very strong view of Satan, right? So they can attribute, they can distance themselves from the Holocaust, but the support for Trump, I think, comes from, I think if you got the average, American evangelical to really think about like, what would Jesus do, from 30 years ago, that old maxim, they would come to the conclusion, like, Jesus would not vote for Trump.
No.
But there's so many voices, though, from the evangelical leadership, even at the local, like, pastorate level, telling them that Jesus is endorsing Trump, that they don't even have the chance to think about this critically or think about their own faith. Well, their faith is totally being like overcrowded by the leadership.
I'd have to go back and check on this, but I'm pretty sure that, for example, Billy Graham was supportive of Carter for coming out and saying he's a born again Christian. But his son is one of these horses behind who's going around claiming that Trump was chosen. I mean, it's complete reversal. It's just so fair. It's very pharisaical. This is the exact thing that Jesus stood against, was using the name of God to basically justify. Well, that's what makes it hypocritical. They don't want to stand and say, well, we don't know if this goes with our Christian values or not, or the Bible, but this is what we want. They don't want to own it. So they'll stand behind God's name or Jesus' name, and somehow that makes it okay. When they know that they're supporting a scoundrel. And there is no way in the world that, I don't care what faults Kamala Harris or Joe Biden have, how in the world could anybody think that either of them is morally worse or even close to being as morally bad as somebody like Donald Trump? I don't see it. I mean, there's nobody out there arguing, Trump's being falsely accused. He's really a great guy. He's so generous and thoughtful and respectful of other people. There's nobody out there saying that, even his own family members.
Yeah, well, and I think part of the complexity here is that you can't demand moral purity from candidates in a democracy.
No,
it's just not realistic, right? So, but that becomes a problem for Christians. I mean, especially we come from the Wesleyan tradition, which is sort of a sub-branch of evangelicals, which demand holiness, right? Mm-hmm. Perfection is actually like a big part of the evangelical identity.
It used to be
for our people.
It used to be.
The question is, like, do you even participate in politics at all?
Right.
Or would Jesus have participated in democracy at all? Or would he have, like the Amish do, just say, no, we're not interested?
Well, evangelicals before the 1960s, actually 1970s, they didn't really get involved in politics for that very reason. That's why John Howard Yoder, a Mennonite, wrote The Politics of Jesus. That was,
I have that book right on my bookshelf behind me.
Yeah, because if you took 20th century theological ethics with me, we covered that book.
Yeah.
But I mean, he had to make the argument that Jesus cared about political issues. Like, in other words, it's okay, but that is a far cry from now. There's a big difference between, okay, we're going to pay attention and vote, and so you may have to vote for somebody that's not perfect, but you should be at least voting, even if every candidate, okay, let me say this, all right? let me be blunt. I can't tell you how many people I heard personally, relatives, friends, coworkers, whatever, when they voted for Trump the first time when he got elected, it was anybody but Hillary. And so the justification of voting for Trump was Hillary Clinton is such a bad person. Anybody but her.
Yeah, right.
Now, why? I mean, this isn't even close to even anything like that. I mean, what I'm saying is, Hillary Clinton, there's all kinds of things on her resume that could be questioned. Okay, the worst they could come up with for Biden is what his son did. Okay. And what did he know about or whatever? But okay, that's a far cry from your kid doing something versus what you did yourself.
Right.
Or whether you abetted them in something illegal. Okay. Which there's no evidence of that. And then Kamala Harris, what have they been able to say about her except that she at one point supported allowing sex change operations for trans prisoners or something like that.
That's a funny example, actually. So that was a law that was created while Trump was in office.
Yeah.
And all she did was follow the law.
Right.
She talks about that in her interview with Bret Baier, which is a contentious interview. Part of the difference between what's happening with the Trump camp and what's happening with the Harris voters, which I mean, I'm going to vote for Harris because I live in a place where there's no other viable candidates. I'm not like a huge Harris fan, though.
Right.
The difference is I haven't associated.
Right. She wouldn't be my first pick.
I haven't associated my faith with this political candidate. I don't feel like Democrat voters are that invested in the candidate at such a spiritual level.
I think, honestly, I'm going to be blunt here. I think evangelical Christianity, as I said, is the least intellectually informed version of Christianity we have on the planet today, and has been developed to date. In fact, it's so disconnected from reality and reason that some of these folks are actually anti-education, anti-reason, anti-philosophy, or whatever.
Yeah, well, you call to mind the Nietzsche quote. The original sin in Christianity is knowledge.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, Judaism too. Then, because yes, it's like the knowledge of good and evil is the first sin. I am not convinced. I'm not convinced. There are probably a few nut jobs out there that really do think that God chose Trump, and they're probably simple-minded enough to think something like that, as stupid and counterintuitive as that is. But I think most of these folks know that they want to vote for somebody that does not align with the religion that they claim to hold. And this is their way to get around the cognitive dissonance of that.
Well, so you mentioned the 2016 election, that it was like because he's not Hillary. Right. I thought for sure that was over when the grab him by the tape came out.
Yeah.
That Trump is clearly worse than Hillary Clinton.
Right.
But because that happened in his past, it was like 2012 or something when that tape was taken, he claimed that he had this like religious conversion. Right. Almost a Constantine moment, right?
Right.
When he sees God in the sky and, magically converts to Christianity.
Well, there are people out there to claim that Mike Pence led him to Jesus or something in the White House.
Well, but he was claiming to have been, really converted before the 2016 election. And that was the narrative that I heard from people I knew. I was like, how are you still voting for this guy? Well, he's not like that anymore. He's repented from that. God forgave him for that. And God has, he's received his vocation, his calling.
Now he extends his pinky.
A political figure.
Now he extends his pinky when he grabs a woman by the...
Yeah. Oh, gosh, that's gross.
Well, anyway...
They called that the shocker when I was a kid.
It reminds me of the Three Stooges. He like get ready to eat, and Mo say, "Where's your Emily Post?" And then they put their pinkies up, and crunch the celery or whatever. But yeah, you would think it's been very telling. It just, I think it wouldn't matter what this guy did. I mean, this is not about him. It's all about them. And that's really what this is about. We've reached a point where, let me say this. Some of you will get this right off the bat. Others may not get this reference. But I think evangelicals are having a Nietzschean moment in their lives. And what I mean by that is, they want to align with a religion that teaches you're supposed to turn the other cheek. You're supposed to go the extra mile. You take the short end of the stick if necessary. You win people over with your love. But for the first time, they don't want to accept that now. They refuse to accept that.
Well, you say the first time.
Okay.
Maybe gradually the first time.
For the first time, I think it's widespread.
Yeah, for the first time at this scale.
Yeah. I mean, yes, there were the KKK folks and all that from the South and Southern Baptist Convention that, was formed because they didn't, of their views toward blacks and slavery.
Right.
So there was all that history and
good luck getting them to admit that today.
Well, yeah. So everything gets whitewashed after, over time, just like the Mormons don't want to acknowledge the polygamy that happened early in their history or the extent of it. But, yeah, so I think that they're at a point where, and this is part of it. Okay. So when evangelicals were the majority of the country, they could democratically choose to have the culture the way they wanted.
Right.
They have gradually lost that majority and they're no longer a majority. And they're now getting down to about a third. I think it's around a third, about 35% of the population. And those numbers.
Was it ever that evangelicals were a majority, or was it that they were just the mainline denominations were also just more aligned with evangelical values? And now the mainlines have kind of gone their own way.
From what I remember reading from like Pew Research Institute polls, I think in the post-World War II era, evangelicalism, if you're going to lump in, say, like United Methodist, if you lump in United Methodist, then yes, they were a majority of the population, because the United Methodists used to have upwards 6-7 million people, just around the same number as the Catholics did. Mm-hmm. So in that regard, yes, but these folks now, they don't want to accept having to live on the rest of society's terms. And they are faced now at a point, are we going to actually stick by the principles of our faith? That I'm sure they don't think of it in these terms, but this is the way I see it. They don't subconsciously or consciously or whatever, they don't want to accept having to live in society on everybody else's terms, like legalizing same-sex marriage. That's like the big thing. Like some of these folks don't want to have to, and it's not like legalizing same-sex marriage is just going to cause, make homosexuality so much more popular and everybody wants to be gay now. Some of that faddishness, there's always a certain amount of faddishness when there's a initial cultural shift, but we're way past all that. The numbers have settled out. They've plateaued about where they're going to be, and these folks they're interacting and meeting and seeing people on a regular basis. That are LGBTQ plus, and they used to say, "Oh well, they're going to force us to have to accept it in our churches." No, there's nobody out there saying that. So, like, they've run out of excuses. So now it's like, oh well, we got to. So basically, Trump is kind of like a scapegoat for them. So basically it's, Trump's coming around to help them protect their traditional values and all this other kind of stuff. And the interesting thing is the LGBTQ thing is the thing that really got them all fired up, but Trump's not wanting to touch that one. I don't think with a 10-foot pole. And
he's not willing to touch the LGB part. The T's and the Q's are on the chopping block.
Well, that's true. That's true.
But because that's such a small subsect of that minority,
right?
It becomes a good tool for like fear mongering, right?
Yeah,
because it's so unknown, it's so non-public.
Right.
And honestly, it's weird. It's weird that you care about what kind of genitalia people have. That's always going to be weird. But because it's such a like, oh, they might be, they might not be, or, they're going to turn this way, it becomes a good tool for fear-mongering the way that being lesbian or gay used to be. Like, oh, they're going to turn your kids gay. Well, nobody really believes that anymore. That's not a viable argument that being exposed to the existence of gay people makes you gay. Right.
And
being exposed to a drag queen might, and so that's the fear mongering.
And there's no connection between a person's sexual orientation and pedophilia. Pedophilia is a different thing altogether.
Oh yeah.
And so that was
we have the data for that.
Well, yeah. But that
you can't really argue it.
But that used to be one of the things that everybody was afraid of. When I was a kid, there were people campaigning just to even keep gay and lesbian people from being public school teachers because they were going to recruit and molest the kids, and
and Florida's kind of going back that way with the don't say gay stuff.
Yeah.
But Florida is Florida,
Yeah. I remember years ago on the Daily Show, Jon Stewart, they had it was a welcome to Florida sign and it said, welcome to Florida. If Darwin were right, we wouldn't be here.
That's a pretty good punchline. So what I find fascinating about the trans panic that's happening on the right now is that this is a tell that Christianity has left the room. Right? Christianity is no longer part of this. Right. Christianity is just like a useful smokescreen for these politics because there's not really anything in Christianity that has anything to do with gender identity.
Well, yeah, but let me while you're bringing that up, let me get right into the heart of this as to why a vote, I don't think Jesus would ever vote for Trump. Or somebody like Trump. And this is why. First, Jesus wasn't interested in political power. And that's all that interests Trump. That's all that he's about. He is at the opposite end of the spectrum. Now, Jesus cared about social justice. Okay.
Right.
But in terms of political power, okay, John 18:36, my kingdom does not belong to this world. If my kingdom belonged to this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here. Or Matthew 26:53, don't you think that I could appeal to my Father and he would at once send me more than 12 legions of angels, he told Pilate. Matthew 22:21, give therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar's and to God the things that are God's. He wasn't interested in mingling church and state. Luke 17:20 and 21. Once Jesus was asked by the Pharisees when the kingdom of God was coming, and he answered, the kingdom of God is not coming with things that can be observed, nor will they say, look, here it is, or there it is. For in fact, the kingdom of God is among you. Okay, so he talks about that. He wasn't about political power. He also wasn't a fan of riches. And that's what Trump brags about all the time.
Yeah, it's a proof of his moral dignity that he's rich.
Yeah, right. Matthew 19:24, again, I tell you, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of God. Matthew 19:21, Jesus said to him, to the rich young ruler, if you wish to be perfect, go sell your possessions and give the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come and follow me. That was a couple verses before. This is the big one for me. Jesus called habitual pathological liars children of the devil. And what is Trump but a pathological liar? John 8:44, you are from your father, the devil, and you choose to do your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. Whenever he lies, he speaks according to his own nature, for he is a liar and the father of lies. If I didn't know that verse was about Satan, I would swear it was about Trump. I'm sorry, but I mean, the guy can't hardly say anything that's truthful.
Well, now, I thought Trump was the father of IVF. Not the father of lies.
My goodness. Yeah. I'm surprised he's not saying he invented the internet and everything else. Jesus called out the Pharisees for a lot of the things of which Trump is guilty. So, for example, Matthew 23, and the most of verses 1 through 36, Jesus said they don't practice what they teach. It's not every point, but a lot of these things. Jesus said the Pharisees don't practice what they teach. Trump's guilty of that. They tie up heavy burdens hard to bear and lay them on the shoulders of others, but they themselves are unwilling to lift a finger to move them. Again, they do all their deeds to be seen by others, for they make their phylacteries broad and their neckties long. No, fringes long. I couldn't help.
That is an interesting aesthetic connection.
Yeah, isn't it? So anyway, they love to have the place of honor at banquets and the best seats in the synagogues, and to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and to have people call them rabbi. The greatest among you will be your servant. All who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted. Jesus goes on with several, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you lock people out of the kingdom of heaven, for you do not go in yourselves, and when others are going in, you stop them. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you cross sea and land to make a single convert, and you make the new convert twice as much a child of hell as yourselves. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you clean the outside of the cup and plate, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and plate so that the outside also may become clean. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which on the outside look beautiful, but inside are full of the bones of the dead and of all kinds of uncleanness. So you also on the outside look righteous to others, but inside you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. So, yes, I think Trump is a big hypocrite. He can't say anything that's true, and everything he says about himself is just a hypocritical lie.
Well, and it's also self-aggrandizing.
Oh,
look
my
at
golly.
me.
Oh, yes.
I mean,
he is
he's
definitely
just
he's not a servant leader. That's for sure.
No. Well, and he's just not who Jesus is talking about in terms of like, he doesn't exemplify anything that Jesus would have stood for.
Yeah. As far as I'm concerned, I mean, the record's clear. Trump is a vile person. He lies, he cheats, he swindles, he commits adultery, etc., etc., etc. And then these folks want to say God is going to choose somebody like that. Why? Why would you think that God would choose somebody like that over somebody else who doesn't have all of those, not just flaws, but vices? I tell you what, evangelicals, here's a nice little test for you. You think Trump's so great, why don't you go out and invite him to pastor your local church? Why don't you go out and find somebody like Donald Trump and get that person to run your church and see what happens? You want an idiot like that to run the whole country. Why? Because you want to change abortion law, or you want to change something else and force everybody to learn the 10 Commandments or something? This hypocrisy is getting old really fast. I'm not trying, let's put it this way. If you want to support him for other reasons, then fine. But leave God and leave Jesus out of it. If you want to somehow, with your twisted theology, say that God sometimes chooses bad people to do his bidding because it's in the Old Testament, whatever, okay, perhaps. But then don't tell me you're a follower of Jesus at the same time. There is no way in the world you can reconcile this. I would put it out there. Why, any of you post a comment, respond, send us an email. You tell us why Jesus would ever choose somebody like Trump, and why would God choose somebody like Trump over any of the other politicians that are out there that at least have some standard of decency. Like, I can understand if you say God uses people that have vices or whatever, but I mean, how many actual good qualities does Trump actually have? There's not really a whole lot of redeeming character traits about the guy. And anyway.
It's like a bunch of Christians voting for, Nero Herod 2024.
Well,
the Nero Herod ticket.
It's it's kind of like the kid that's feels like he's getting the kid who feels like he's getting picked on at school, and so he turns to the school bully to take up for him.
Yeah, a little bit.
I mean, isn't that the kind of the way it seems? So this isn't about principle. It's about them getting their way. Christianity throughout this is a part of the Protestant Reformation. See, early Christianity, the folks basically, and Christianity in a lot of places in the world, they don't have this like state established all this religious privilege that Europe and Europeans and Americans and Canadians have had for all these years.
Right.
It really, the Catholic Church went through this, lamenting their loss. And so the Catholic Church went through this by playing footsies with some of the monarchs in Europe to try to get some influence and power back. And they ended up sometimes playing footsies with some very evil people. And it led to very evil people occupying the Vatican.
Yeah, I saw a picture on Reddit today of Mussolini harvesting wheat as a propaganda photo of Mussolini harvesting wheat, posted the day after Trump went and worked at McDonald's, with a little bit of intentional irony, I think.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, if it weren't for Trump's addiction to Big Macs, you would be surprised that he was even ever in a McDonald's, but supposedly he's like hooked on the Big Macs. So I don't know. He probably puts his own special sauce on them or something.
Oh, I don't want to think about that. Trump brand mayonnaise.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, this
comes dyed orange.
Here, and this is, yeah, I'm being critical. I'm being critical of the folks that are supporting Trump, but my motivation in doing this is not really supporting Trump per se, but you're dragging the name of Jesus through the mud and doing it. So if you're going to support somebody like Trump, leave Jesus out of it. Jesus doesn't need that kind of association. That is terribly, terribly misrepresentational of Jesus and who he was and the way he conducted himself. If that's your version of religion, then fine. Keep it to yourself. Don't go dragging Jesus' name through the mud because you can't accept societal changes that you can't outvote people anymore.
Yeah. Go get your own Jesus with blackjack and hookers.
Yeah.
Well, and actually Trump will give that to you probably.
And now you're sounding like Bender on...
yeah. Well, he's the one who said that.
Yeah, he's the only one who played blackjack and hookers. So anyway.
Yeah. Well, and Trump might be Jesus with blackjack and hookers.
Oh, no, don't say that. Don't say that. Don't say that. Yeah, I don't even want Trump even mentioned in the same breath as Jesus, to be honest.
Well, as an anti-Jesus.
Oh, well, Antichrist. Because I've actually read people commenting on that all these folks are worried about the Antichrist coming, and then when he does come, they line up to buy his Bible.
Well, isn't that what Revelation predicts?
Yeah, it does. It's
his America Bible that's made in China.
Yeah, but they want us to believe that they're not the ones being duped, right?
Yeah,
they're not the sheeple. It's amazing. I don't know. It's like Americans are really trying hard to prove to the rest of the world that democracy will eventually fail.
Yeah, well, and I think it's almost like, I think some people subconsciously want democracy to fail.
All right. I was debating in my mind, and I'm still wondering whether this might be worth an episode. But here's what I think is going on. Okay? So let me back up and use my illustration first. Whenever it's not the people that are the most educated that are the most arrogant. It's the people that are a little better educated than the average person, but not enough to be aware of how much they don't know. So I've used this illustration when I talk to students. It's like martial arts. It's not the second, third degree black belts that are going out there trying to act tough because they're confident in their abilities. They don't have to prove anything. They've already earned the belts. And if somebody tries something with them, they just flatten them with one punch, one kick. Okay.
Right.
It's the people that maybe move up like 2 levels of belts or whatever, that they get a little ahead of the other people in the group and they think they're Bruce Lee. This happened to, and I think I mentioned this story before, but a guy my brother went to high school with, ended up he went up several belts, but wasn't a black belt. He ended up picking a fight with 3 guys at a bar in the middle of winter, went outside to fight him, slipped on the ice, and then they hospitalized him. And because he tried to kick one guy and slipped on the ice. And this is what I think is going on in American culture. There's a certain point, like the reason that democracy has worked in the past is because the average person knew that they didn't know enough to be able to, like, in other words, they had to trust the news broadcasters or the experts or other people and kind of weigh things out. There were always a few holdouts, but there wasn't like this mass, just like how many people think they know better than the AMA about vaccinations.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Even RFK and all these people, and with all this bogus pseudoscience. See, the thing is, our culture has reached a point where we know enough that we don't just accept what somebody says because they're an expert, but we don't know enough to be able to tell the difference between a solid argument and a fallacious one that sounds good, but isn't really based on anything solid. And I think that's where we are as a culture. So we have a bunch of people, they won't just accept something at face value. So like the previous generations, earlier than the baby boomers, okay? Those folks basically just relied on what the leaders and the experts said, okay? Because they knew, like none of my grandparents went past the 8th grade. So it wasn't like they were going to go out there and have ideas. Oh, well, I know they're wrong. They knew that they weren't well educated. And so they's like, okay, well, which one sounds more reasonable? And you're still relying on some expert. Now we've got the internet. We're a little better educated, but people aren't as educated as they think they are. And they're not as smart as they think they are. But because they're smarter than people used to be, all of a sudden now everybody thinks they're a genius. Everybody thinks they're an expert. And so you have all these people on social media and YouTube and everything else, and half of them don't know what they're talking about. They might know like some surface level stuff, but when it comes to some kind of a nuanced understanding of something, no, they don't know enough to really understand that.
But they give people who, really don't have any sort of like training in political science or sociology or even theology, like who don't have any higher education, they give those people an opinion to latch onto if it was their own. Right.
That's I guess that's that's part of my point. I didn't really make it, but yes, the thing is that you have people who before in past generations would simply have deferred. Like there was a turning point. Like I remember as a kid, and I'm only referring to evangelicals here because that's where I observed it, but I think the same thing happened across the board. There used to be a day when people went to church or the synagogue, and whenever the pastor, priest, or rabbi said, they put a lot of stock in it because this is the person that went to school, got the training, they've been reading stuff, but now people have the internet. So they just personally handpick the stuff they like and toss out what they don't like because they can go to the internet and find somebody who agrees with them, even if they don't know what they're talking about, and feel like, oh yeah, I don't have to accept what the priest said today or what the pastor was arguing.
Well, I feel like it's gotten to the point where even pastor, because I do know that like people do take their pastor's opinion very seriously, and pastors do talk about politics a lot.
Yeah.
The problem is that even pastors today are kind of ignoramuses, right? They don't even know.
Well, they're populist.
And they're speaking to stuff that they have no training in. They don't have any expertise in some of the issues that they're talking about. Well,
they're putting stock. Okay. So, but let me ask you this. I would say, yeah, they're putting stock in what their pastor says as long as their pastor is saying something they agree with. You let the pastor get up there and challenge their notions and say, oh no, we shouldn't be thinking this way. You they would
Sure.
they
Yeah.
would turn you off. You would have to kind of gently go at it week after week after week and gradually condition their thinking. I mean, I know this from my own few years as a pastor. Like, if you really wanted to challenge the way people think, you can't just come out and lay out a reasonable argument and have them be open to it. You had to kind of hint at it and raise questions, and you had to keep coming back to it periodically to gradually change people's minds. And it's only gotten worse.
Well, here's what I'll say then. The role of the pastors, at least the ones that I have seen that play a role in this political movement for Trump and that whole ideology, is that they tend to motivate political action and they tend to solidify opinions.
Yes, exactly.
And which gives people permission to stop thinking about it.
Well, yeah, the pastor is more like the, Joseph Goebbels, giving out the propaganda and rallying everybody and that having that sort of a thing.
Right.
It's everything's being populist driven. It's being driven from the ground up. And that's why we have somebody like a Donald Trump who's being revered. Donald Trump does not reflect the thinking and values of the more sophisticated people in society. I'm sorry. I'm not saying that everybody there aren't, let's put it this way. I've been looking, I don't know how many different, and you watch videos and interviews and such, and even the politicians who support Trump don't really give good reasons for it. I mean,
yeah. Or they'll say like, "Oh, well, he didn't really mean that when he said it."
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So, it's just, it really is, disconcerting. I'll say it that way. So anyway, I really hope that everybody gets out there and votes. Now, if you really are convinced in your heart of hearts that somehow Trump is a lesser of two evils between him and Kamala Harris, I don't know where you come up with that, but you should vote your conscience. But truthfully, I would just hope there'd be enough people that would just say, okay, let's be honest. I don't like voting Democrat, but in this case, this is the lesser of two evils. I mean, fortunately, there have been a number of prominent Republicans.
Yeah, I was going to say, you got the Cheneys.
Well, yeah.
Like,
I mean,
how much more Republican can you get than the Cheneys?
but that's the point. What about people just standing for decency in the United States and respectability, even internationally? The only people that Trump cares to please are the other dictators around the world. The communist dictators are the ones that, he spent the most time with. Anyway, and I'm not really convinced that even all that was just him wanting to open up doors of getting businesses in their countries.
Yeah. Well, don't you know there's lucrative trading to be done in North Korea?
Is there? I don't know.
North Korea doesn't have any money.
Yeah,
there's nothing for us there.
Yeah, I remember. I think it was John Oliver years ago did a thing where I can't remember what it was that Kim Jong-un was like he was inspecting these processing plants, and he was like, I can't remember what the food was. They were kind of like saying he was like addicted or obsessed with it or whatever. But
oh, really?
It was almost like chicken nugget slurry or something. I can't remember what it was. It was kind of nasty.
Well, so there was a picture of Trump in his office. I think it was in Mar-a-Lago with the leader of the Longshoremen's Union.
Okay.
just before the strike started, several weeks ago now.
Okay.
And on Trump's office wall is a picture of him and Kim Jong-un being buddy-buddy with each other. He has a framed picture of Kim Jong-un in his office.
Oh, my. Yeah. Birds of a feather flock together, folks. Anyway.
If a Democrat did that, that would be the weekly news for Fox.
Well, and that's another guilty party in all of this. And, ladies and gentlemen, we've said this before. These folks don't have your best interest at heart. I would like to think, that there are politicians still that do try to actually care about the American public. And I think there are some. But here's the thing. It's time to start thinking a little more sophisticated than, well, as long as I can find some fault with the other party, just because you can find something about one candidate doesn't mean that justifies voting for the candidate of your party regardless. Like, everything's not a moral equivalence.
Yeah, well, and if you must vote for Trump, at least leave Jesus out of it. Exactly.
Yeah, so if you do that, then I'd leave you alone, I guess. So I hope everybody found this, motivational anyway, but want to challenge some of you. I mean, the early Christians had to decide if they were going to stick with Jesus as Lord or Caesar as Lord. Now it's time for some of today's Christians to make the same decision. Is Jesus really your Lord, or is Trump your Lord? And I'm sorry, that's just the way I feel about it. And so I kind of feel like a part of my own heritage and background and upbringing, the best part of it is being destroyed. This is the part that I actually took pride in and have taken pride in, that people were people of principle and stood for something. And where are these folks now? Who are the people of principle? That's what the world needs. The world doesn't need, sleazeballs making deals with us to get our way subversively. What people need is to transform society through living out virtuous principles. And I don't fault anybody for sticking by their pro-life guns, because I don't think abortion is a good thing. I don't think it ought to be illegal across the board, but I like to see it happen as few times as possible. But but some of this other junk, I don't know how you can justify all of this stuff with Trump and all the problems he's caused. I mean, again, the guy tried to overthrow the government when he lost the last election. So anyway, he didn't try it, but he basically set people up like the puppet master to get them to do his bidding.
Let's be real. He did essentially try to overthrow the government.
Well, he tried to get his followers to do it for him. And that's the way somebody like him is going to operate.
I guess he didn't technically walk up the Capitol steps and storm the confirmation of the election of Joe Biden. But in every other way, he did do that.
Yeah, don't think for a minute that Trump really cares about you, because he doesn't. He's only doing this for what he can get out of you. And once he has your vote, and he can't be elected again, then he's not going to care about you. And if you disagree with us, drop us a line. We'd love to respond, okay? And we'll do it kindly. So anyway, we hope you've enjoyed our time here. You want to close this out, Isaac?
Yeah, reach out to us at thehappycynics@gmail.com or drop a review on Apple Podcasts. If the world doesn't end, we will see you next week.